Every journey into AI marketing is unique, and this podcast has been me trying to document that story. But even then, I forget to share a lot of the important elements that happened before and during the creation of this very podcast. And I wanted to share that story in a more robust way because I find that stories have lots of lessons. It's the reason why I like to even read biographies of famous business leaders, because there's so many business lessons in it and you tend to remember it more. So I wanted to share an episode of that I just recorded on another AI marketing podcast called the AI Marketing Case Studies podcast with my friend Fernando, because he did a good job of asking questions to pull out all kinds of interesting parts of the story, as well as some tactics that I'm using on this show that aren't AI related, but are really helpful. And I think you'll be very fascinated in what I'm trying to do with this podcast. So take a listen.
Hey, everybody, once again, in another fun episode of the AI Marketing Case Studies podcast, where we interview marketers doing really innovative and creative things with AI. Today, I'm very privileged to have Dan Sanchez, who is an AI marketing consultant, creator. He does a lot of AI stuff with Social Media Examiner. He has his own podcast called The AI Driven Marketer. He has worked with Sweetfish Media, with James Carberry. I want to learn a little bit about that in the process of the interview. Where do we find you today, Dan? Where are you located?
Near Nashville.
You're in Nashville. Okay, perfect. And I am actually in a Starbucks at Querétaro, Mexico. Long story, but this was the only makeshift studio I could deal with right now, and not the standard one where I have all the perfect lighting and setup, et cetera. So if you hear ambient sound of all the, the jazzed up coffee goers with their caffeine and their brownies, you'll know what it is. So Dan, just for a little context for the listeners over here, run us through a little bit about your background. So you have a pretty good experience there with marketing and with podcasting, et cetera. Tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are today from your start in this world of marketing.
I mean, like most marketers, I kind of stumbled into marketing. Like who goes to school and thinks I want to be a marketer when I grow up? I literally just wrote a kid's book about that. So I needed more kids to know, at least my kids. But I stumbled into it from the art and design and kind of web design and get into digital marketing and became full-blown marketer. And there was a time early in my career where I was at a conference for a software called Infusionsoft, and they had this competition called the Ultimate Marketer. And they were doing these crazy automated campaigns, but they weren't graded just on like how much revenue they got, but the creativeness of it, how the efficiency of it, time savings. And I remember seeing this competition once, and I remember it was like a pivotal moment for me. So I was like, man, I want to be that. I want to be the ultimate marketer. And something inside me when I was in my early 20s was like, that's my calling. I am going to be the marketer's marketer, and I'm going to master all things marketing. So I did. And you take it a channel at a time, and I went really deep on every single channel until I had only a few left. And the funny thing is podcasting, like we're talking now on a podcast, it was one of my last channels. And that's where I ran into James Carberry, like you mentioned before, at Sweetfish Media. It's the largest B2B podcast agency in the world. And he saw all the other marketing goodness I was doing. And he was like, dude, you got to come join my team. You are running circles around all these other marketers. And you're not just good at one thing, you're good at all this stuff. Like, that's our audience. You got to start getting out there. And I wasn't even posting. I wasn't doing anything. I was like, oh, okay. I thought everybody did everything. He's like, no, bro. Like, I've interviewed a lot of marketers. You got to come start talking about this stuff that you're doing. Because I was crushing it at a private university. We tripled enrollment. We automated everything. It was cool.
Wow.
But he pulled me in to start talking about marketing and got me started on LinkedIn and got me started on his podcast, B2B Growth, and taught me the ropes. That's where I really I think social and podcasting were like the last two big games I hadn't really mastered yet. And he fast tracked me on that. I picked up a lot of podcasting and did hundreds of podcast episodes, and then did really well on LinkedIn because I didn't realize I had a lot to share after hustling. After, when you find that core motivation, that like lights a fire in you, and you wake up 4:30 in the morning, enough mornings to learn how to do the thing and then practice it during the day, you end up I don't know, picking it up. And then recently it's just been AI. Because I saw the writing on the wall maybe a year and a half ago, and it was just obvious. I'm like, this thing's going to take over everything. That's it. I'm putting all my chips in. AI's the thing. I'm starting a whole podcast about this. I'm reading every book I can find about it. I'm talking to every person who's doing anything cool with this on my show to learn everything I can. So I'm in full learning mode, trying to get everything I can about this now.
Yeah, I was actually looking at your podcast on Spotify, and your first episode was December 4th, 2023, which was, that was pretty early on. Actually, I started a meetup in Austin in June of 2023 called the Marketing Automation and AI Meetup. And then Sharon DeCaro joined me as the co-organizer, and now she's runs it. But that was really at the beginning of this AI stuff. And December, I would say that time from like about, April, May, June to December of 2023 was those really early days. So I think that you were very prescient. You were at the right time to launch your, the AI driven marketer podcast during that
I
time.
got
So,
lucky.
yeah.
After Sweetfish, I joined a tech company, and that founder had the vision immediately once ChatGPT came out. He like changed the whole roadmap for his product and got all into AI in like spring of 2023. Following
Was
along
that
with
an
him, and I
Element
wasn't at that
451?
company long. It was called Element 451. It's a higher ed CRM and education company. But they were doing incredible stuff with AI way ahead of everybody else. And I think getting a vision from there. And then it still took me a few months for it to like simmer after I left that to figure out like, oh my gosh, this is going to be everything.
Well, before we get into the AI, which, obviously this is the AI marketing case studies podcast, but, from what you talked about, how you decided, all of a sudden that you wanted to be the best marketer out there, it was at this Infusionsoft conference, which now is Keep, right?
That's right.
But their complex automation, slash CRM tool, et cetera. And then when James Carberry invited you to join Sweetfish Media, that was when you said you were learning social media and podcasting. So you essentially learned the complicated stuff first, and then you went into the stuff that was like, I guess, on
I
the
don't know,
surface at
man.
least seems
Like
pretty
media
straightforward.
is very complicated. The logical stuff of automation and direct marketing, much more straightforward. That's why like Ogilvy, like the OG marketer from like Mad Men era, he's like, I wish every marketer would start as a direct marketer first. I wish every marketer would be like Lester Wonderman, who was like the father of direct marketing. He's like, you need to start with that as the foundation. And that's what I did. Flint McLaughlin from Marketing Labs, no, not Marketing Labs, Marketing Experiments, was kind of like the guy who taught me how to think like a marketer. It's a very direct marketing approach, A/B split testing, lots of value propositions and all that kind of stuff. Doing paid
The
media,
offer,
AdWords,
yeah.
SEO, inbound, drip sequences, lead magnets, and all the marketing automation, even phone call and inbound call center stuff, like all that kind of stuff was like as complicated as that is. Social media is harder. Like at least I can set that stuff, forget it, and split test it logically and just find winners all the time. But in social media, great, you have a winner. Well, you gotta start again the next day. That's hard. It's the creative skill in that. I think I can see why it went last. If podcasting's on the other side is I think is one of the easier ones. The secret tool that I think most people don't understand about podcasting is that you think it's a content game, and I'm like it is, and it can be, but if you haven't done podcasting, you really don't understand that it's the relational game that makes podcasting like boom, absolutely worth it, even if you get zero content out of it, because you'd be surprised how many people you can show up. Even authors of your favorite marketing books will say yes to being on your podcast, even if your podcast has nobody on it. It doesn't really matter. There's something about this like co-creation. This is what I learned from James Carberry. He wrote the book on this topic of,
I have the book that he
yeah,
wrote.
you have the book, see,
Yeah.
Yeah, content-based networking.
Yes, content-based networking. And it's so funny because when he coined that term, it was about maybe 2 or 3 years ago or something. He was talking about category design. I guess he had kind of come across the Category Pirates writings, Chris Lockhead and Eddie Yoon and all that kind of stuff. And I thought that was brilliant. I thought, damn, that's really, really cool. And he started practicing this thing where he would go to different cities and have these networking dinners, right? With people that had found him through the podcast. I went to one of them in Austin
Okay,
with
that's how
Sahil
you know. Well,
Bloom.
I'm like, you've rubbed shoulders with James before. When you started talking
Yes,
about the dinners, that was before I even joined Sweetfish. So I'm like, you go back when you've known Sweetfish for a while.
yes, exactly. Well, that's cool. You've sort of had a very high pedigree of education in the marketing space. But let's get into your your light bulb moment with AI. So you were, like you said, you were working at Element 451, where the founder really was doing some advanced stuff with ChatGPT way back, as far back as you started working there in March of 2023. But so from that point when you were working there to your podcast when you launched it in December of 2023, maybe you started it before then, but your first episode hit 2023. What triggered that? What happened in your mind to make you decide to go whole hog into AI?
A lot of good things come out of really hard seasons, and that was a really hard season for me. I left Element 451 on okay terms, but like they pivoted. They hired me to grow an audience. They ended up letting me go and then just acquiring the audience rather than growing it in-house. So that's fine. But then I was forced to go solo, and it was a rough transition. I ended up trying, like most people, when you're forced to, you're like, well, I had enough people saying like, Dan, now's your time. You have an audience on LinkedIn. You should be able to make this work. And I was like, at the time, I was really trying to build a niche for myself around audience growth. And sometimes you go to market with an idea, and find out that it just doesn't work. And it's not because the method doesn't work. It's not because you don't know how to do it. It's because people don't want to buy it. And that was the thing I heard over and over again. It's like, hey, it costs too much. It takes too long. And the ROI just doesn't come back fast enough. And I was like, it is a long game. Oh, and it just took too much time. So I was kind of like, all right, well, after pivoting and trying out multiple things over and over again, that was in that season of December. I was like, man, I'm making it. I got some podcast clients. I got some marketing automation gigs. I'm making it, but dang, this audience growth thing isn't working out. And that's when I was like, this AI thing, I don't think I can make money on this right now. It's freaking early. But that's when you start wrestling with like, what do I want to be about? Every marketer knows you have to find a lane. Even if you know all the channels, it doesn't matter how good you are at all the channels. I found out what matters is you're remembered for something. When someone says you can't just be passed around as just a normal marketer or a normal this or a normal that, you have to be known for one thing. And I'm like, this AI thing has to be it. I feel it. Like my spidey senses are tingling. I remember having that feeling about marketing automation when I first saw Infusionsoft back in 2012. And I'm like, everything's going to be like this. This drag and drop journey builder thing, this is going to be everywhere. And it did. I remember feeling it about 2010 about WordPress, or maybe it wasn't even earlier. I think it was 2008, before WordPress was like the full-blown CMS. And it was just a blogging platform. I remember trying to build websites. I was becoming a web designer. And I was like, Drupal, Joomla, WordPress. I'm like, this WordPress thing, this is special. There's something about this. And now it runs like 45% of the internet. I remember feeling it about TikTok before it blew up. I didn't pay attention to it though. I'm like, man, this thing's going to blow up. Some people are going to make a lot of money off this thing. It's not going to be me though. So I've seen it. I've felt this thing so many times. And I'm like, AI, I'm feeling it now. This is the moment.
Yeah, I started getting into WordPress in 2007, kind of around the time you were doing it. But no, that is really cool. It's like being known for that one thing, and just kind of dedicating yourself to that. And just a comment about, getting out there into the field and figuring it out. Like you first started to talk about audience building, but you realized that there really wasn't a market for your content. And then, you kind of you pivoted to AI, that first of all kind of harkens back to the whole lean startup methodology that Eric Ries talks about. But it also goes to something that I just saw recently, was Lorne Michaels, the founder and manager, CEO of SNL, talked about how, he didn't have any grand vision for SNL. They just went out and started doing it, right? He had an initial idea and they started developing all the themes and all the new things that they're famous for just by getting out there in the field and doing it. So my comment to you is I think that you wouldn't have figured out that AI was the thing you had to do until you had started going out there and trying to make a name for yourself after the kind of disappointment and low point of your last employment.
I mean, some of us would call that providence, but I look back on it, I'm like, man, it was really good that I hit that point, because now I'm glad that it forced me to really think about it, start investing in AI early. And I wouldn't even say AI hasn't matured yet. We're still on super early days, like super early. I'm glad I get to pioneer it with Michael Stelzner at Social Media Examiner, because he's also seeing the writing on the wall saying this is going to take over everything. And we've talked multiple times and he's like, this is really early. It doesn't have the feel of when social media was like really starting to like peak and Social Media Examiner took off. He's like, but it will. And which is why I decided to work with him, because obviously he's got much larger audience and way more resources. I'm like, I'm going to run with you on this one. He's like, I could go solo, but I think it would be better if we did this together.
So there's so many things I want to ask you, but there's two general directions I want to go in. And I think I want to start off with your podcast. Did you just start experimenting with AI and then talking about it? So I want to talk about that, about the how you got the content for your podcast. And then I wanted to talk about how you're using AI personally within your whole marketing process. But let's talk about the podcast, because the latest episodes you have is customize ChatGPT's instructions and memories now to 10x your work later, OpenAI's operator, 3 many and the need for marketers to lead, and then co-writing a book with AI. I'll have to talk to you about that as well, because I've actually co-written 3 books with AI. One is
Nice.
my own, and 2 for some clients that I ghost wrote for. But let's get into like the how you're coming up with the content for your podcast.
When I was working for Sweetfish Media, one of the top marketing topics that was new to me, because B2B was kind of new to me when I entered Sweetfish, and there was a few topics that I needed to learn everything about in order to understand B2B. One of them was account-based marketing. I had to learn everything about that. And then another big one was thought leadership. I'm like, ooh, and there was something about it. Maybe it's because I'm like that INTJ, Myers-Briggs, like Enneagram 5 with the wing 4, and something about that was just really appealing to me. I'm like, this is interesting. You mean there's whole groups of marketing that just get like the whole idea is putting out original thinking and ideas and leading people's thinking. And like, that's the idea behind thought leadership. I'm like, so I went and read every book I could find on it, looking for a process and how to essentially become a thought leader, or I hate calling it that, but like, it's still the appropriate term for it. You can call it authority marketing. You can call it point of view marketing, whatever it is, it's thought leadership. So I wanted to learn more about it. I had a hard time finding a process of what one would do in order to do that. So I ended up inventing one in the process of trying to figure it out. That became a really helpful thing for me that I now apply to AI, and I call it the 30-30-30 plan. Okay? Because every time if you want to become known for something, you don't have to become an expert. You don't have to be an expert in it right away. But if you start as a student and do the 30-30-30 plan, you could gain authority over time. And that's what I'm trying to do with AI marketing. It is 30 books, 30 interviews, 30 blogs. Okay. Whatever topic you're trying to dive into, go and read every single book published on the topic. If there's more than 30, then it's too big of a topic, niche it down further. Most topics, like subtopics, is like within marketing, there's probably only 10 or 20 books on it. I promise, because I've done this multiple times with multiple subjects, because I'm a nerd. You can see a bookshelf behind me. I read a lot. I've done it with multiple topics of marketing. And thought leadership had about 15 books. So I went and read all the books on thought leadership, like every one, even the unknown ones, even the ones that were like cheap throwaways that nobody buys. I bought it. I read it. You'd be surprised how fast you can read a book when you're reading them all on a very small topic, because each additional book after the first 3 only has an incremental amount of new information. So the ability to skim through them and just look for the new parts, very fast. So it's and this is, the people are like, some people definitely listen to this being like, 30 books? I haven't read 30 books in my life or something since college, I'm like, I promise, it feels more like reading 6 books or 5 or 6 books. And what's that in a course of a year? Not much. So if you know everything that's been published on it, then you have a pretty good understanding of the field, which builds into the next one. Do 30 interviews with people who really know what they're talking about on the subject. Probably call and interview some of the authors you've read, right? You're going to be able to go way deeper, actually having real substantive conversations with the people who actually know stuff. And after you've read all those books, you're probably going to have some questions. You're probably going to be able to go deeper than you would have in those interviews before, because you've wrestled with the material. And then you need to publish some information. You need to actually like work through it. And I really like the process of like just answering questions that people have. In fact, I like ranking for SEO. SEO was one of the games that I played that I was pretty good at for a while. So I know the process of finding the keywords people search and writing authoritative blog posts on the topic in order to get ranked. Write those blog posts, even if they don't rank. If you just try to answer those questions really well, you really master the fundamentals of reading all the information, interviewing the experts, and then answering the most frequently asked questions on topic. And you do this all out and kind of like post about it on LinkedIn while you're doing it, being like, oh, I read this book. Here's what I learned. Oh, I just talked to this person. Here's what I liked. hey, I just read a blog post about my journey into thought leadership. Here's what I learned. Here's how to become a thought leader on LinkedIn. All of a sudden, after some time goes by, people are going to look at you and be like, hey, Dan knows some stuff.
Yeah,
and when you actually have some original thoughts to offer, people are going to listen. And then thought leadership. So that's essentially been my process for LinkedIn, and why unfortunately there's not a lot of books on this topic. As they come out, I read them, but why I use the podcast in order to learn. Now I do less interviews, though I still will do some in the future, but I'm now publishing more solo episodes as I wrestle with things and experiment with the AI tools myself and publish my own findings via the podcast.
So when you interviewed these 30 people, was this for your podcast?
Trying to think it through. There's about 30, between 20 or 30. The 30 is like, there's nothing magic about the number, but it does start to put into perspective like more than 5.
Yeah.
Like 2 dozen at least. Yeah.
Yeah. And it almost feels like as though, especially if you like read the 30 books and interview the 30 people, it's almost like an accelerator for the 10,000 hour rule that, what's his name came up with. The one who wrote
like Malcolm Gladwell.
Malcolm Gladwell. You know, it's almost like an accelerator for that. I actually love the 30-30-30 rule now that you mentioned it. Okay, well that's very cool. So tell us a little bit about how you're implementing AI in your own marketing processes. If you're, like, for example, I know you collaborate with or you work with Michael Stelzer over at Social Media Marketing World, how you apply it over there.
One thing that I've been working on for a long time is trying to figure out how to like speed up this whole podcast production system. So I spend a lot of time trying to figure that out. And I've only recently, I figured out how to automate a lot of the pre-production in a really cool way. You could check out myshowrunner.com. I built a custom GPT. It was one of the first things I did. I did it as a collaboration with Susan Diaz, who was talking to me about her chat GPT pre-production process. And I was like, And then over a weekend, I flipped it into a custom GPT and we both worked on it, made it better. So if you ever want to see that, I released the instructions for it so you can just totally copy it, rip it off. And I promise, like if you haven't done a custom GPT yet, go to myshowrunner.com. Just read the instructions. It's very clear what it's doing, and you'll learn how a custom GPT works. And this is a really robust one that I find get a lot of value. It speeds up the whole pre-production process. I use it for every interview I do now. But now I'm like trying to automate the whole post-production process. Hence, like why before we jumped on this call here, I was talking about how I use Zencastr, right? It's a more automated podcast recording and then post-production I can publish the episode. But now I'm building a whole automated workflow so that it can take the podcast, because I run a video podcast, the video feed actually plays the video on Apple, and then take that feed and then automatically grab the video from it in the title and upload it to YouTube, crop the square podcast thumbnails, upload a unique thumbnail for every episode, crop it, upload that to the thumbnail image, take that YouTube video, or actually take it, transcribe it. So I have the transcription, turn that transcription into a blog post, put that blog post in my WordPress site, embed the YouTube video into it. That becomes the header for that blog post. And then actually take it and run and scan it with ChatGPT again for the transcript and be like, here's 3 unique ideas, and then turn each of those unique ideas into a bunch of social posts, right? So 3 unique posts per episode, and they just trickle out over time across most of the social networks. And that just runs on autopilot now. Every time I publish an episode, bam, 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 done. Now I still have to, before I publish the social post, I do have to look at those and tweak them a little bit. I haven't crafted a prompt so good that I don't have to like test it a little bit, So in Airtable, I just have a little button I push when it's approved, and then it takes it the rest of the way. But that used to take a long time. The next part I'm still working on is the newsletter. I want to integrate it so it pulls specific episodes, only certain episodes, has a little filter, and then pre-drafts it into the newsletter where I can then upload the images and send it out, because I struggle to get the newsletter out every time, even though I literally have a whole podcast series I literally record it so that I can repurpose it as a newsletter. But, you improve these things over time. For Social Media Examiner, I do a lot of social media, of course. It's Social Media Examiner. And I've built a lot of custom GPTs and projects just to speed things up. I have a series every time I come up with a social post or a video, like you got to write all the captions for it. And you got to write different captions for different platforms, because they all want something a little different lengths, different types of hashtags, no hashtags, URLs, link in bio. There's all these little rules for every social platform. So I'll upload a single social post, or maybe the transcript for a short form video, drop it in something like a social media post writer, and it just like, bam, busts them all out. Here's what you need to write for Facebook, X, for LinkedIn, for TikTok, and it just gives it to me. I post them into Google Drive and send it off to the editor just to double check, make sure I didn't do something dumb. So it's a bunch of little critical processes like that I use to automate workflows. I haven't really started digging deep into Social Media Examiner and starting to build like my podcast production workflow, but we actually have a really technical guy on staff that's building some of those more sophisticated automations. He's much better at it than me. So I'm like, I'll let you handle that. I do a lot of education for their AI Business Society though, so that's where I get utilized the most.
Well, I'd love to dive a little bit deeper into your podcast production, your automated podcast production process. That whole thing that you mentioned is just, it's earth shattering. And I don't say that lightly. It's like, that's what I need for this podcast. So
every podcast needs it.
Yeah.
I haven't published my whole workflow on it yet, though I've started teasing it because I'm still in the process of like perfecting and getting it up there and running through it multiple times in order to make sure that it works right before I actually like, hey, this is it. I've been trying to work on this particular problem for almost a year now because we all like, I don't know, you have a podcast. We all know that the distribution of the podcast is everything because podcast has almost zero discoverability. If you don't rank for some kind of keyword, like B2B marketing, like B2B growth does for Sweetfish, right? That's how they grew. People were searching for B2B marketing. B2B growth came up first. It was one of the first ones in there. Like that's the only discoverability you get in podcasting. So you have to repurpose it for social. You have to get it onto YouTube. You have to do all these things. And I know it's a massive problem for most people. And I've been trying to work on it. The problem is like Zapier can't do it. Make.com can't do it because the video file's too big. You can't, right. It's really hard to automate video. Because video files are gigabytes big, especially like this interview, this will be like 3 gigabytes worth of video once it's compressed and finished. So I did find a program that does do it, and it's nn.io. Fantastic little software. N like the letter N, 8 the number, and then N the letter again. It's a stupid name. It's definitely named by some developer that didn't have any sense for marketing. But you know what? They built an awesome product, so here I am talking about it.
Right. So it's like a replacement for Zapier or for Make.com, right?
Yep. I don't use Zapier or Make.com because Zapier is like stuck in the past. And Make, so many people were using Make and I just felt stupid using it. I'm like, I can't get anything to work in here. I feel like an idiot and I'm pretty good at this stuff. I didn't realize how bad Make was until I talked to that technical director at Social Media Examiner and he felt like an idiot using it. I'm like, dude, if you feel like an idiot, like Make's broken. This is dumb. And I feel bad slamming Make, but I'm like, dude, like it really is a struggle to get that thing to work. And I will say NAN is hard. Like this stuff's hard. It takes me an hour to 3 hours per node, which is all the little automation things that you set up to hook this and it goes to this and it goes to this. It takes me a long time to set up each one, but I can actually do it. It actually, as time goes by, it gets longer and it gets better. I couldn't get it done.
Wow. So you record the podcast, and I know off camera we were talking about how within Zencastr, I use Riverside over here with Zencastr. You can kind of do some edits. You can do some automations to take out the ums and the ahs and the,
that's right.
The uncomfortable pauses or what have you. Get rid of ambient noise, and then you can upload it, and then it could go to all the different podcast platforms. But like, at what point so like, what would you use NN for in that process? So, because are you creating video shorts on your podcast?
You don't use it until after the podcast is live on all the podcasting apps.
Gotcha.
Zencastr takes care of you from recording to publishing on the RSS feed, right? And every podcast has an RSS feed. You hook that RSS feed up to Spotify and to Apple and all the other podcast apps out there, right? And every time you update the feed, it's what happens when you publish it on your host. Who do you host with? Like Libsyn, Blueberry?
I'm
Spotify?
using the creators.spotify, the one that used to be Anchor.
Yeah, the one that used to be Anchor. Yeah. So Spotify puts out that RSS feed, and they have their own in-house system for video or for publishing to Spotify. But they do publish an RSS feed that then goes to Apple and all the other ones. Now Spotify kind of hides it from you, but you can find it. Because if you get that RSS feed, you can hook that feed up to something like an automation tool and it just waits and it checks the feed every hour. That's what Apple does. Apple's just checking your feed every hour to see if there's something new. Once it finds something new, uploads it to Apple. So And that's how I kick off that tool. RSS is a great way. RSS used to run the world of internet. Remember that when people used to like subscribe to via RSS? That was a long time ago.
Yeah, I would subscribe to RSSs of all these blogs. And all I would do to just go to my RSS reader and just see all the latest blog posts.
What was it? FeedBurner. We all use FeedBurner to aggregate the feeds, and we all subscribe to things via Google Reader or something like that.
We're telling people how old we are here, dude.
Back in the internet marketing days.
So I think I'm doing it kind of backwards then, Dan, because what I do is I'll download the and I don't even use the account level within Riverside that gives you the transcript. That's another level up. I just use the first tier paid version. I'll download the video. I'll put it into Descript to get the transcript. And then I'll get the video shorts from Riverside. And then with each one of the video shorts, I get the transcript to do a social media post. And it seems a little labor intensive compared to what you're doing. But what you're saying is after you get it off onto the RSS feeds, and you get it onto Apple or to Spotify or to Google Podcasts, et cetera, then that's where N8N comes in to do its magic. And so are you creating video shorts for YouTube Shorts or Instagram?
It won't. It doesn't create, NAN doesn't create shorts. It just comes up with the text post. And because I have a graphic that loads with every single episode, which I put more and more time into, because having one good graphic per episode, because that YouTube thumbnail is so freaking important, right? But I'm like, if you're going to put that much time into the YouTube thumbnail, you might as well, I design it as a square, but with I design it in mind that it's going to get cropped from the top and the bottom and become a horizontal image later on. So I put a lot of time into that image. If you go to my website, like Sanchez.com, and scroll down, you'll see the images, and you see I put more time into it than normal. And I use a combination of Midjourney and Photoshop, those AI tools, in order to make those. So I do that. Now, NAN does do the resizing of it because it's way too big of an image for YouTube. It has to resize it, then it crops it, and then sticks it into YouTube. So that way I don't have to spend extra time uploading the video, writing the title, copying and pasting the description over. I just automatically loads in whatever the podcast description is. It goes to YouTube, adds it to the podcast playlist for my podcast on YouTube, and then sets the thumbnail. So that's done. I don't have to deal with YouTube. And then the blog is another thing. It'll publish the blog post. And it's just using the transcript to make the blog post, and then the transcript to make the text for the social media post. And on some of the social media posts, I'm also using that podcast cover image as like a graphic to post with it. Because again, I put a lot of time into it. So it becomes a nice little social image. That way I'm getting all the use I can out of that one freaking image, right? So that's what I'm doing.
And why are you spending so much time on the, because you did mention that people spend a lot of time on the YouTube thumbnail, so you might as well do the same thing with your podcast. But what is the importance of that, the episode image?
The click-through rate. I mean, you want more people to have a first listen, and a lot of people, like YouTube is driven by thumbnail images. That's why Mr. Beast spends about $10,000 per image, and he makes multiple images per video. The image is almost as important as the video.
It's like the hook in a LinkedIn post or in a blog post, right? Or a title. What is that? What is the thing called? I think was it Eugene Schwartz who talked about this, or Joe Sugarman who talked about the slippery slope, where 80% of the people will see your headline.
Joe Sugarman.
So you got to get them to at least read the first line, and then the first line is going to get people to read the second line. So you got to spend inordinate amount of time on the headline, the opening hook, if you're talking about a LinkedIn post, or the thumbnail, or your episode image. That's really critical.
The episode image. The point, that's using Joe Sugarman's language. The point of the episode image is to get them to read the headline. The point of the headline is to get them to click play. That's it.
Exactly. It was Joe Sugarman. Okay, perfect. So I noticed that one of the episodes that, and I'm gonna listen to this as soon as we hang up over here, but is how you're co-writing a book with AI. I've actually did 2 ghostwriting gigs for 2 clients of mine from Mexico. They both have outsourcing companies providing, developers and other types of skill sets to companies in the United States, and they want to expand their marketing efforts in the United States, and they thought that writing a book would be a good idea. And so what I did was I interviewed them, and I leveraged AI to come up with initial drafts of the book. And then of course you have to have a human in the loop. As Russ Honeyberry said that AI is kind of like a ghostwriter, but you got to go in and you got to edit it, et cetera. But I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your AI book writing or co-writing process that you talked about in your episode there.
Yeah. I do find the better you get at using AI, the better it can write for you. And it works just like a ghostwriter. Like you've done some ghostwriting and working with it. I've had some friends as ghostwriters. I know the process. Like you come up with the idea and they have to interview you. They have to suck it out of you, right? And then you give them,
Exactly.
you give them the baseline story, like, oh, here's the idea, here's the top line. And they're like, oh, cool. Well, that's not enough. Now I have to go and find out tell me more about that. That seemed like a critical point for you. Like, that's why I even started with that story about the conference and me wanting to become an ultimate marketer. I know that because AI and I've sat down and it's interviewed me and asked me like, hey, tell me more about that story. It seems like that was a critical part. And that's why I tell it now, because AI's pulled it out of me, being like, you should talk more about that. I was like, dang, AI is a great coach or consultant. The funny part is you have to get it to prompt you. You have to almost lead it, help it lead you. And it's really good at that. So what I'll do is I'll give an initial pass of the outline. And I set all this up in a ChatGPT project. This is the best way to do it right now, because in the project, all the separate chats you have remember conversations from past chats within the project. So if you have one project for your book and have one chat per chapter, it can maintain much more of the context from chapter to chapter, which you weren't able to do until that projects feature came out recently. So that's a new thing. Before that, I'm sure was a lot harder. But now you can be like, okay, here's the general idea from the book, and here's some of my basic content. I'm going to load that in as instructions and material in the project. And then from there, I take a first rough pass at the outline. I'm like, hey, here's my first rough outline. ChatGPT, help me flesh this out based on what we're trying to accomplish here. And it'll take a pass and it'll flesh out the outline a little bit more. I'm like, great. I'm going to go ahead now and give you all, I'm just going to word vomit. I'm going to dictate all the stuff that I know that needs to go into this chapter. And I'm just going to use this outline and talk, right? Because there's nothing easier than just looking at a bullet point list and just like word vomiting everything you know about it as you work through the list.
Exactly.
Right? And that's what you do with the ghostwriter. That's exactly what a ghostwriter is going to do. They just needed you to talk, and they're going to take notes while you talk and go back, and they're going to record it and listen to the recording and painfully go through it again until they get a coherent draft. So I give it all that. But before I have it write a draft for me, I'm like, okay, ChatGPT, I've just given you a lot. Ask me some questions of details you need still in order to make this good. And that's where the real magic happens. So I have it ask me additional questions based on the stories and the case studies that I'm giving it. And then it asks me multiple questions. And then I go through just another round of dictating and I answer them all exhaustively as much as I can. It's just one long freaking prompt. Bam. And then it's like, okay, you've done a good job of filling these in. And I'm like, is there anything else? And it's like, it'll either say like, oh, I think it always asks some questions, but I can tell when it's got it. And I'm like, okay, write a draft. And each draft is only about 1,000 words at a time. So literally it's painfully writing 1,000 words at a time, of which each chapter for me, I'm walking through that whole process 2 to 3 times, sometimes 4 or 5, depending on how long the chapter is in order to get the content out.
Right.
So
the chapter is about 4 or 5,000
I'm working on
words.
Not the whole outline for the chapter. I'm working on just a section of the chapter at a time. Bam, bam. And I have to go through word dump and then question and then answering the questions and then it come up with the draft and I might edit some things. But honestly, usually when you walk through a process like that, it's pretty freaking close. Like you don't have to edit it a lot if you've prompted it well and you've given it all the context to work from. And that's just with 4.0, man. When 4.5 comes out soon here, like it's going to be flying.
That's amazing. So getting back to, with a project, is a project similar to a custom GPT, but it just has that bigger context window so that you can remember previous chats, or?
It is remarkably close to a custom GPT because you get instructions, you get to load an instruction with it, and you get to upload documents for it to reference. So the one difference is you get to imagine with each custom GPT conversation you have, every new conversation you have, it doesn't remember any of it. But in a project, it groups all together, so it has the context of all those. Now, ChatGPT is getting sophisticated to where even if you're having like a plain Jane vanilla conversation with ChatGPT, it can still reference past conversations you've had, or at least recent ones, even if you don't have them in a project. But by containing them in a project, it knows like, hey, these are related. And you can force it to call back and be like, hey, remember when we talked about in chapter 2? Can you pull some of that material into this and reference back to it right here? It'll be like, okay, and it does because it remembers. And sometimes it'll do it without even being asked. It'll just be like, it'll just start bridging it together. It's really fascinating. I'm hoping the context window gets larger because that becomes a limiting factor for something as long as a book, but it's still pretty dang good.
So in those instructions and the documents that you set up, the document, I think you mentioned this before, but I wanted to just kind of like clarify this for my mind. Do you upload samples of your writing, or did you maybe try and write an initial chapter or section of a chapter by, by yourself as a say, hey, listen, can you model all your voice and style and et cetera, speak at an 8th grade or 5th grade level based on this or whatever? Or how did you set the instructions for the voice?
I had already done that long ago and made my own custom Sanchez GPT like writer. So I just took that and took some of the instructions from that and stuck it into the instructions for this book project. But I gave it more context, like, hey, this is what we're writing for. Here's where I want the style to go. Because how you write for a blog is just different than a book, right? So like I
Yes.
modified it for that, but I took a lot of my key writing style tendencies and just transferred it over to the instructions for the project.
So did you do any research, like any third-party research, or are you using any references to studies or to other books, et cetera, for your book, or how are you
So
handling
that's a
that?
fun part
How are
too.
you getting cheap? Yeah.
So this book in general is about the 5 types of AI marketing. When we're pioneering new stuff, then new thinking needs to come in and help create categories. I find the process of creating categories or taxonomies helps clarify what the land looks like. If you ever played Settlers of Catan, it's organized into like different hexes. You got your forest over here, your mountains, your rolling hills, your wheat fields, like every new land, and that's what we're dealing with. Like we're dealing with a lot of unknowns. So I'm trying to come in here and bring some clarity, shed some light in it by grouping it so that when we can deal with it with groups. I mean, that's why you have the whole animal kingdom broken up into groups, even though there's some oddballs that, cross lines sometimes as with all taxonomies. So the 5 types of AI marketing is what the book's about. And it's essentially me trying to bring some clarity. I've already published LinkedIn posts about this. I've already published blog posts. I've already done episodes about this. But I'm trying to bring it and bring some more credibility to it and some more case studies to give more examples and to package it all into a book so that people don't have to go and find all the stuff everywhere. They get it all in one nice little tidy package and they can listen to it or read it. So that's the purpose of the book. I'm trying to remember. I like somewhere in there. I'm like, wait, what was this question again?
Yeah, it was the external sources, like third-party sources.
Oh, third-party sources. That's right.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm leaning on a lot of personal experience. The early chapters are like how I got into it. A lot of the story that I've shared here is part of those. Setting it up, I do a lot of time defining what AI marketing is, what it's not, other people's definitions. But then I have to get into the 5 types, which are going to be like a more traditional business book where I need case studies. I have lots of case studies. I did a lot of interviews. So those I'm using first. Those are my primary sources. But it's not enough, and I need more. One of the great tools that just came out that I'm using right now is deep research in order to go find them. So I've been using deep research from Google when it first came out, but now that OpenAI's got one, I might start using that one because it's deeper and better. So I'm using deep research. So I'm like, hey, AI, these are the types of case studies I'm looking for in these kinds of markets using AI in these ways. Go and crawl the internet and find them for me and link back to the sources so I can find them. Google is really good at pulling a bunch of them for me. Also, because I know where a lot of them are, they're on OpenAI's website. They're on Google's website because they want to showcase all the best possible case of these things. And of course, some of the types of AI marketing that I have are a little thin because it's like one of the types is AI analysis and forecasting, but that's still a very premature field right now. We're not a lot of marketers are using it for analysis and forecasting. There's just little bits and pieces of it. So that chapter is going to be a little light. I'll have to come back and update it sometime. But for the most part, a lot of them are pretty easy to find case studies. So I'm using Google Deep Research to go and find ones that I can't find. I'm also just finding ones from my own podcast and then supplementing some with like from the big AI companies that have already have pretty solid published case studies in order to pull.
Well, that's very cool. So when is the book coming out, Dan?
It's a good question. I was going to try to sprint it and get it out by the end of February. And then I was like, part of me wanted to spend a little bit more time getting a little bit more case studies firsthand in order to do it well. So I slowed down a little bit and it'll probably end up being somewhere around this summer, but I'm really looking forward to getting it done. And it's not like it takes that much time in order to put together with the process I just outlined with ChatGPT. But I wanted more firsthand case studies in order to pull from.
Yeah. And I'm sure you're going to do the pre-launch, get a pre-launch list together so that you can have people who will already have read the book and will be ready for the reviews by the time the book is launched, etc.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I hate that process so much that I probably won't do it. I should do it, but I don't want to do it. I'm just like, so much work. I just want to put it out. I'll even give it away. Like I just want to put the information out there, but part of me is like if you don't, I know like if you don't charge money for it, people won't read it. You know what I'm saying? It's like if you
Yes.
gave away a course, they would never just watch it. So you have to charge something for it. That way you get some buy-in to actually like consume the material. But I'd rather just publish it on my podcast for free. That's what I'd really like to do.
And the time we have left, and look at this, it's 47 minutes, and I can't believe it's been 47 minutes. It feels like it's been 15 to 20 minutes, right? Tell us about what you're excited about right now in AI-driven marketing.
If there were no more innovation coming to AI, we would still have 4 to 5 years of like breakthroughs of how this stuff's going to impact marketing. And I mean, like, no more models come out, no new stuff. We just have what we have right now. 4.0 is as good as it gets, or like the O3 mini thinking model. It doesn't get any better than that. We would still have years of innovation of what we have to come, because we're barely keeping up with what we currently have right now. Yet new stuff's going to be coming out next week or in a month. It's coming out so fast. So I'm just excited because I'm like, man, now's a good time to be a marketer. There's just so much new stuff coming out. It's going to lead to so much innovation. Some people are crying about it being limiting creativity or even making us lazy. I'm like, man, I feel like I'm more creative than I've ever been before. Being able to write books, I'm like, dude,
Totally.
with the way video is going, I'm like, I'm going to make my own documentary this year. This is going to be a thing. I've already put out a whole music album, and I'm not a musician. And I actually like listening to it on a regular basis. I did that just this last November through Suno, that AI app. It was fantastic. And I listen to it all the time. So like the creative ability now to mix and match and all these things and put out really cool things is going to get better. And the people who are not afraid to wrestle with it and come up with good stuff. And as the models get better, the projects will get better. Like someone's going to make a blockbuster movie in the next couple of years just with AI. And it's going to be fantastic.
Yeah, actually, I said this to somebody, a friend of mine, that 2023 was kind of like the Pearl Harbor moment for marketers with AI, because at first we were shocked by it. So many of us were laid off because of it. Agencies either had to pivot or close their doors, like content marketing agencies literally had to reinvent themselves. But then after we got over the shock, after marketers got over the shock, I think, and I can witness this by all the people that I've interviewed in the short lifespan of this podcast, that marketers have been on the cutting edge in terms of finding innovative uses for AI in marketing, just like you mentioned right now. Yeah. So great. Well, listen, Dan, there's the obligatory thing about where can people find you. I know where people can find you. Sanchez. So there's on LinkedIn, you have Dan and then brackets.
Sanchez.
Sanchez.
My name's Dan Sanchez. My friends call me Dan Chez, and dansanchez.com was taken. So I had to figure out something. And that was a nickname my friends have called me for a while. So that's what I go by.
Well, it's fantastic. And your podcast is the AI-driven marketer.
That's right.
Master AI marketing to stand out in 2025. You can find it on all the major podcast platforms.
And YouTube.
And thank you. And YouTube. Okay, YouTube. Perfect. And you'll be speaking at Social Media Marketing World coming up here, March 31st in beautiful San Diego. I remember going to a traffic and conversion conference in 2018 in San Diego. And as we were leaving, there was all these other internet digital marketers flying in. I'm thinking, wait a minute, you're a little late for traffic conversion. No, we're coming in for Social Media Marketing World, which is even bigger than TNC. Yeah, it was even bigger than TNC. I was like, oh my gosh, I should have stayed another week in San Diego for that. But you're speaking at the conference, which is fantastic. And it's just been a privilege to have you here, Sanchez. We both have Hispanic last name, Sanchez and La Bastida. So that's good. And we will see everybody in the next episode of the AI Marketing Case Studies podcast. See you then.